You can win $2 million playing fantasy football, especially, if you use promo code The Show and you're on Underdog, of course. And look no further than the proof in Sam Sherman, who just won Best Ball Mania. I'll say in legendary fashion. I wanted to start there. Your decision to go live for 4 hours pretty much and nearly having Puka just like snatch your soul, that was awesome. But you also got the benefit of that celebration video. Just wanted to start there. How did you and your family celebrate in the moment, after the moment? And then are you holding the line on that wedding budget, or is that just completely blown out of proportion?
Yeah. So starting with the celebration, or I guess the decision to go on stream, I kind of put out a tweet, like not really thinking about it at all. I was like, hey, people want me to sweat this out. I'll do it. Then it actually came to the moment and I was like, this is excruciating. Why did I agree to this? But weirdly, I think like the first half of it calmed me down a little bit. But yeah, having Davis and Pat argue about like random prospects from 4 years ago, that kind of distracted me a little bit. But then it came to the second half, absolutely insane game. We can maybe talk more about that later. But yeah, the celebration, I was just with my dad and my fiance up in, suburban southern Maine. So there wasn't a lot of, strip clubs or anything exciting to go out to afterwards to celebrate. So it was a very wholesome night. We popped some champagne, made myself an ice cream sundae, sat around a fire, and just hung out with my dad and fiance. And, I was wired. We stayed up till like 2 or 3 a.m. just kind of talking about it and celebrating. But yeah, incredible night.
Yeah, I mean, the video was so awesome. You and your dad were like the same person to me with that. And you really reminded me of that meme of like, are you winning, son? And then this time, instead of just scrolling on the internet, you're winning $2 million. So it was awesome stuff. I hope the ice cream sandwich ice cream sundae was really good too. How involved were they in the like understanding of who you were like sweating against? Because like at the beginning of the night, you were fading Puka because you were up big. And then all of a sudden, because Bijan went crazy, then you were fading Bijan at the end of it. Were they like pulling up the standings? Did they know the different outcomes that you were kind of sweating here? Or were they just like living through the screams from you upstairs?
I think so. At the start of the night, I gave them kind of a list of, hey, here's who we're rooting for. Here's who we're rooting against. And my dad he wrote down on a notepad the players' names, their numbers, what team they were on. So they had a little like cheat sheet. My dad's not a huge football fan, but he knows enough about it to follow along, obviously. But then the Bijan thing happened, and I did not inform them of Bijan mattering. So I think at a certain point, they did not know, like every time Bijan touched the ball and it looked like he was going to break a 50-yard score, they did not know that mattered. But I think they heard my screaming and freaking out and maybe caught on a little bit. But yeah, luckily for them, they were blind to the Bijan risk there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. They were probably sitting there like, this Bijan guy seems pretty good. I hope Sam isn't facing this guy. Yeah, that was really awesome. I had to follow up there. I mean, you win $2 million here. You are a retired fantasy football analyst. Have you sent that video to your bosses? Does anybody at work know? Have you made any work decisions? Are you trying to come back in the industry? Let's spin this thing forward. Are we getting fantasy analyst Sam Sherman? Or are we getting spreadsheets in the office Sam Sherman? Good question.
So first I'll address it like, do people in my office know about it? I wasn't like planning on telling a bunch of people. But word spread pretty quickly from my friends at work who follow me on social media or whatever. Right. So it's kind of gotten to the point now where most people know about it. And pretty much everyone I run into is just like, you're still here today? Like, why haven't you left? Like everyone's confused why I'm still around. To the future career decision, I think I'm pretty certain I'm going to be doing fantasy football content again. I don't know what that means. I don't know if that means like I'll get a full-time role in the industry, whether I'll do something like, I don't know, like ADP chasing where I do a weekly podcast as sort of like a side gig while I'm working in a different job. I don't know exactly what it looks like. I do want to start making content again. I just got to figure out like what's sort of the right balance for me, career, fantasy stuff. But regardless, I'm really excited to start doing something again in the next, I'd say, year or so.
Well, that's really exciting. We all loved you on the Waiver Wire show, and obviously, we would be love to work with you, and I'm sure everybody else would too. And it just, you win $2 million, you got to go on GoDaddy and look at the available website names and see if you're going to launch your own site. That's kind of the pipeline too. But
that's the first step.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, like, this isn't like an easy thing to accomplish. Sam's team, we're going to go through right here. You can see that there was some moments where he just grinded through, and then the right guys at the right moments won this. We're not going to pretend like this is some easy thing to accomplish here. But we do believe that there are some ways to help you guys out and build better best ball teams. So I think that's where we're going to pivot for the rest of this video, analyze his $2 million team, see the things that he did very well with this team, kind of go against some of the narratives that are currently out there, and build out some good strategies that at least increase our odds of taking down the big one. So here's his $2 million team. This team was drafted in June out of the 9th spot. I would say, looking at it, it was a pretty balanced team in general. You start at the top, wide receiver, running back start, but even like through the first 12-ish rounds where most of your fantasy points come from, 1 quarterback, 4 running backs, 6 wide receivers, and a tight end. That's pretty balanced as well. I see a lot about like these contrarian builds, like either double elite tight end or 0 RB, or you name the strategy here. You just win this thing with the balanced build. Is there something to that, or is this just kind of you can win with anything?
Yeah, I think there's definitely something to the balanced build idea, especially in the ADP environment we have now, where, I think the most like common kind of like contrarian build is 0 running back. And I think that works in certain draft environments in certain years. It certainly can work. But in this world where running backs are just priced way down, in my opinion, versus where they should be, I just don't think it makes a ton of sense to do like an extreme 0 running back build. So yeah, I think like for me, my kind of main frame of reference for how I think about best ball is diminishing returns. And if you allocate a ton of draft capital to one position early on in the draft, then, let's use wide receiver as an example. Say you take, on this team, I think I had 4 wide receivers in the first 6 rounds, right? Mm-hmm. Then if you're thinking about your pick in round 7, like what are the odds that wide receiver is going to add a lot of points to your team? It's just much lower than, a running back, or if you don't have a quarterback yet, those positions are just much more likely to add points to your roster. So that's really how I kind of think about constructing my fantasy rosters. I really do want to end up with like pretty balanced builds. I mean, certain times they'll get pushed in slightly more contrarian directions, but most of the time I'm sticking with something like this, a fairly balanced build.
Yeah, I talk about diminishing returns all the time, and like I'm an econ guy. That's what I studied in college, and I'll never forget like the analogy for diminishing returns is just how many bridges you're going to build across the river. That first bridge that you build across the river has a lot of value. That second bridge across the river doesn't really matter nearly as much. And by the time you built the 10th bridge across the river, what exactly we're doing here, I do think that does apply. And maybe like looking at your team here, Darnell Mooney being the wide receiver 5, I would say like of all of the mistakes you made, like maybe that was the big one here, where like wide receiver 5 Darnell Mooney versus getting your running back 3 or another position you didn't have a quarterback at the time. I think it obviously didn't cost you at all here, but that's like an example of the diminishing returns being into effect. And I do think that we'll get to the running back conversation. I do think that's a big key here, but diminishing returns, very important. That's why I don't really love like double elite tight end and other things like that. Like the guys we're drafting early, we got to assume they stay healthy, they can do their thing and keep riding, especially in best ball where you don't have the waiver wire to kind of fix your mistakes. Like any other topics like on diminishing returns, like any other examples that you think apply to that?
Yeah, I think the double elite tight end thing is a big one. But yeah, I think like, we can talk about other positions like in quarterback. I think quarterback's maybe an interesting one, using the concept of diminishing returns, where I guess pivoting a little bit, Hayden, to like the 3 quarterback discussion. I do think like sometimes our brains get broken a little bit going from redraft to best ball. And for a long time in redraft, the strategy has been just take, if you're sort of a sharp, redraft player, it's just take 1 quarterback, probably take them pretty late in your draft. Like that's the whole late round quarterback strategy that Zach Reason made famous. And that worked for so many years in redraft. And it's a good strategy. In best ball, I just think it's a lot different. Quarterbacks just score so many points, and say you take just, 2 quarterbacks in best ball, one of them busts, one of them gets injured. You don't have the ability just to go to the waiver wire and pick up, Trevor Lawrence or
Yep.
Jackson Dart. Like you couldn't redraft, right? You can just scoop off streaming options off waivers, plug them into your starting lineup, and you don't really lose anything if you bust at quarterback from your draft picks. In best ball, it's just way different from that perspective. Quarterbacks just add so many more points to your roster. So we can talk about the specifics on my roster here and where that played a huge role. But I think that's just another sort of element where maybe best ball and redraft are pretty different at the quarterback position.
Yeah, I completely agree there. That's what goes into like the other big thing I learned in Econ is like supply and demand, where the reason why you can wait in your redraft league is there's a way more supply of quarterbacks waiting on the waiver wire for you to pick up. In best ball, that supply of quarterbacks is no longer there. So you have to actually draft them. And I also think similar to that is the difference between full PPR and half PPR. It sounds silly, but in half PPR, the only position that's not catching passes in fantasy are these dang quarterbacks. So they're the ones that are going to benefit the most by being in half PPR, which is what Underdog uses. And I know there's a lot of home leagues that use full PPR. So I think it takes those two concepts, I do think, make the quarterback discussion a little bit interesting. So that was gonna be like my next like big thing here is the two quarterbacks versus three quarterbacks in 18 round best ball on Underdog. I would say for the most part, like through the 6 seasons, there's probably been more 2 quarterback teams. And then I think some of the simulations people were running in the offseason were kind of saying, hey, this third quarterback is starting to matter. I think it really comes down to 2 topics that you've already hinted at. Is one, there's adding more points to your roster because they're scoring, 15, 20, 25 points versus tight ends. It's 5, 10, or 15 usually. So just like more raw points. But I think your team in particular benefited from the other aspect, which is if one of your quarterbacks gets hurt, that's pretty much a death sentence if you don't have a third quarterback. And that's exactly what happened to you. So you draft Brock Purdy, you draft Bryce Young, and then later on in the draft, you draft Tyler Shuck, which is, we'll get into the team stack, and that's an interesting combination there. But the fact of the matter is Tyler Shuck added more points to your roster than Brock Purdy throughout the regular season, which is the only reason why Brock Purdy was allowed to score, 30-something points in the finals to bring you to $2 million. So I do think that there's a lot of merit to this 3 quarterback build on top of the ways that you have to kind of advance through the tournament. So I'm a big proponent of 3 quarterback builds. I think that's where the market's going to go. And if that means we have to pay a higher price tag for quarterbacks, I will be a buyer of that. Do you agree with all that?
I agree with all that. And just like to make a point that sounds like really dumb, which you kind of got at, like the fact that quarterbacks just on average score like twice the amount that tight ends do, the other sort of onesie position, that just like matters a lot. And I think some people are just like, oh, it doesn't really matter like raw points. It's all about kind of like points above replacement, right? But like you think about, on this specific team, I think I actually kind of had a decision, right? Like, do I want to take a third quarterback with Tyler Shuck, or do I maybe want to take a third tight end and tack on, Mason Taylor or Cade Otton, right? And when you think about it, like, say your tight ends like are both injured or benched for a stretch of time, like you can actually survive, I think, 4 or 5 weeks just getting zeros at tight end, because all the other teams out there are just getting, replacement level 8 points a week from their tight end, right? So that adds up to 40, 50 points over 4 or 5 weeks. That's not great, but you can survive that. At quarterback, if you're just getting zeros at quarterback for like 4 or 5 weeks in a row, when the replacement level score at quarterback is like 18-ish points or something like that, like you're just buried and there's no chance you're going to advance. So I think that's kind of what the simulations are showing, people at Established Run, Legendary Upside that are building these things. Like these late round quarterbacks that are starters on their team, even if they're not any good or expected to be any good, they just are going to add so many more points to your roster than like a super late round wide receiver, running back, tight end is going to.
Yeah, especially like with the injuries, you account for that. So every quarterback's projected to miss, 2-ish games on average. And then you also have the element of the 2 bye weeks where your third quarterback has a roughly 50-50 chance of adding points to the roster. And we also have breakout candidates of the late quarterbacks, which I would argue Tyler Shuck to some degree was. I would say Jackson Dart was an even better example of that, where like all of a sudden your third quarterback could just end up being the highest scoring quarterback of the bunch, even if everybody does stay healthy. Like that is certainly possible there. So my prediction definitely is going to be more 3 quarterback builds moving forward. And I will say that's also pretty smart. Another thing that you did, just speaking of the quarterbacks, to hit on them, is all three of your quarterbacks were team stacks, and the quarterback you drafted was after his pass catcher. So you take George Kittle first, followed by Brock Purdy. You take Tedero McMillan, followed by Bryce Young. You take Chris Olave, and then you follow that up with Tyler Shuck. It's so obvious. Like, you have to stack your quarterbacks and your wide receivers. That's in your home league. That's in DFS. That's obviously in best ball too. It sounds like so obvious, but it's just like another example of you doing that. I'm not even sure if you have to say anything more beyond that, but it's just like another example where you go 3 for 3 with it. I do think at the end, a Jawan Johnson and Tyler Shuck pairing at the very end when we're just throwing darts, I think it's a very good way to like end your rosters as well.
I agree. I don't have a ton to add to that. I would say like it actually didn't work out in this particular roster. I think Brock Purdy counted for all 3 playoff weeks for me, weeks 15, 16, and 17. But I do think just having multiple stack outs in the playoff weeks to get that kind of like ping-ponging effect where you can drag along sort of a lower owned quarterback to the finals. I do think there's something to that for sure. So that's just another like reason why you kind of want to stack multiple quarterbacks. And I would say like, I think like on this team, I stacked all 3. I don't think it's like the worst thing in the world if you have like 2 stacks and then like 1 solo quarterback that's unstacked. Like ideally he stacked, like try to make a stack work, but like, you know, especially if it's a rushing quarterback, like I could have tacked on, I don't know, Jackson Dart onto this team without any stack. And I think that's totally fine as well.
Yeah, I think in the example from the draft board, the pick right after Darnell Mooney was Patrick Mahomes. You didn't have any of the Chiefs, but we're talking about the 7th round where Patrick Mahomes is getting drafted next to Darnell Mooney. Like I think it is it's okay to just take the projection pick there, especially once you get to like, let's call it 75 overall and stuff. The projections kind of really start to drop off in that range. And I do think some of the quarterbacks, we'll see a big influx of quarterbacks kind of in that range, because like Matthew Stafford was going too late, Brock Purdy was going too late. All those quarterbacks were like 100th overall, 125th, 150th overall. I can see that entire group, Dak Prescott, all those guys getting closer.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, all of our quarterbacks are going to be drafted 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th round. And then we're just going to be all competing for that range. I think that would also be another price movement that I think would make a lot of sense. Right before that range, though, I would say the 2 biggest players that made your team work were Jackson Smith and Jigba and Chris Olave. The wide receivers in this range, rounds 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, were terrible. Like they were often the worst picks, like every single round. These 2 and George Pickens, but especially these 2 guys, were like the exceptions. Was there anything about the JSN profile, the Chris Olave profile that stood out to you? Is there anything that we can learn from this group in general?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And I wanted to go back and look at my exposures because I actually was really high in Olave. I think I had him around 20%. JSN for me was actually not a huge target. He was at like 5 or 6%, so slightly underweight. I actually had a huge stand on Devontae Adams, who would argue is like the other wide receiver that I think would have worked out in that range.
He would have worked, yes.
If he didn't get hurt. But I think for JSN, I honestly I didn't see this coming. I was like a little bit down on him. Like I liked him better than, Marvin Harrison, Garrett Wilson, like other wide receivers in that range that I just full faded. I just thought like, hey, Seattle, they're bringing in, more of a run heavy offensive coordinator. All the signs they're telling us is they want to be kind of more run heavy, not going to throw the ball a million times with Ryan Grubb and Geno Smith. Right. I just didn't see the like insane target share ceiling that JSN had. I don't know what he finished at, but at some points in the season, he was at like a 40% target share or something. Something just absurd. So I do think there is something to the target competition story with both JSN and Chris Olave. And I think you could even maybe argue that like with Garrett Wilson, it would have worked out kind of if he didn't get hurt as well. Like I know in fantasy, we like to say, some people like to say target competition doesn't matter. Like it's all about individual player talent. It gets to a point where if there's just no other viable wide receivers, tight ends on the roster, these really good players can just rack up insane target shares. So I think that was the case with both JSN and Olave. And then I guess one thing I'd add on Olave is like, this gets to the injury prediction conversation, I do think we were getting sort of a he's going to get concussed and maybe retire discount on Chris Olave, which sure, I get why people are thinking about that. I don't think that was like completely unfounded, but predicting injuries in fantasy is just a complete crapshoot. So anytime you're getting like a price discount on a player that's still young, still in their prime, doesn't have any like ACL recovery they're coming back from, anything like that, like I'm usually just going to buy that type of injury discount. I think that worked out really well with Olave this year.
Yeah, I think those are two huge parts of it. The target competition, I'm in full agreement with you there. I think it's one of the worst narratives out there. Like there's a reason why when a starting wide receiver goes down, everybody on the waiver wire shows, and then in DFS just immediately starts to pick up the other wide receivers. Why would that be unless the target competition matters? Same thing with the Chris Olave. He like really goes crazy after they get rid of Rashid Shaheed, was actually a real player for the Saints earlier in the season. There's lots of examples with this. And then on the concussion part of the story, there is people that are going to be making $50-100 million. Like they just don't retire, man. Like they're going to take on the risk. Like it's an absurd story when a player does retire early from concussions. Like I'm not a doctor. I'm not advising him. I'm not sure if it's good or bad, but most Americans are chasing the $50 million. And Chris Olave has that opportunity ahead of him. So same thing with like Tua and stuff. I'm more scared of real injuries like the Brandon Ayuk multi-ligament knee tear than these like narratives of somebody going to retire. And then on top of that, both these guys on rookie deals, we know that they're good players, both first round talents, both productive in college and stuff. So I think they're on top of all that. They were just like, we knew they were good players, just things kind of had to align properly, and they certainly did. The other part of this that I found fascinating was the Derrick Henry part of this conversation. Okay? So he was your second round pick. Obviously was the reason why you win $2 million, goes absolutely ridiculous in week 17. Who could have seen this coming? Has anyone heard of Derrick Henry in December when it gets cold out? So obviously
there's not like a specific term that rhymes with a month or anything. I can't think of anything.
Not. No, of course. He's not only like 31 years old and has only done this for 8 years in a row. But anyways, and it's not like it's half PPR or anything like that either. But what I found fascinating, yeah, of course. The thing I found interesting though was when I looked at your team in the regular season, he added so many points to your roster. And I compared Derrick Henry's season to the other players in this fantasy points over replacement metric. And the only non-running backs to add more fantasy points over replacement than Derrick Henry were Puka Nacua and then your teammate here in JSN. In the regular season, this bad regular season that Derrick Henry had where Lamar missed and the offensive line wasn't very good and everybody's saying he was washed, he was still 18th overall in fantasy points over replacement in the regular season. Only 6 non-running backs were ahead of him. And then once you add in the postseason scores, he vaults into the top 10. My theory with that is that people that aren't doing the math with these fantasy points over replacement and half PPR are really underselling the floor of these early running backs. So like even like in a season where it wasn't the greatest for Derrick Henry, he still was way better than the wide receivers. I think that you hinted at it that you think that the running backs are a little bit underpriced. My math, and this has been going on for quite a while here, my math agrees. And this was like another data point where you're looking at that team, like, Derrick Henry was a bad second round pick. And then you look at it like, he was off of his ADP by like 4 or 5 points. And like, if you draft a player at 14th overall and they finish at 18th overall, guess what? Like, that's not a bad pick at all for the regular season. So what's your thoughts on like running back scoring in general?
It's a good question. A lot you brought up there. I think I'd start with the overall running back landscape. I do kind of agree with your data. I've looked at it different ways in terms of sort of like spike weeks above replacement and your sort of like overall seasonal fantasy points above replacement. Kind of tells the same story that I do think, especially last year and the year before, running backs in fantasy or in underdog specifically have been really, really priced down to the point where I think just like rounds 2 through 5, you're just getting really, really good values if you just kind of look at a projections standpoint. So this team, I think, was like a bit of an outlier for me. I actually after taking Henry, got some good values at other positions. So I didn't go back to running back until round 7. So it was kind of a bit of a hero running back, lighter running back build. But in general, yeah, I do really like getting, 2 or 3 running backs in the first 6 rounds or so. I just think they're really good values there. And then with Henry specifically, it's interesting you brought that up, that he finished 18th and I took him 14th. Like, I do think that is a little bit the thesis with Derrick Henry in half PPR best ball. Like, I think he is, say he goes next year around the same spot. That's kind of, I'm guessing, where he'll land, around pick 15, 16, 17. I think he's probably like a dog to beat that in seasonal fantasy points above replacement. But I think his floor is quite strong. And also, we just know Derrick Henry's history of putting up 30 plus, half PPR finishes, which are massive in half PPR. Like, I think if you looked at the last, 7-8 years of data, it probably is only CMC that's better than him at doing that. Like, even someone like Bijan, Taylor, these guys who are awesome running backs, like, Henry's ceiling is pretty unmatched. So he doesn't kind of have that perception of the sexy spike week running back, but I think he really does fit that profile, because he'll have a bunch of games where he has 20 carries for 70 yards and no touchdowns, and you're like, oh, great, 7 points. But he really has the ability to break off 2, 3, 40, 50 yard runs in an individual game. And in those games, he's just going to massively exceed expectations.
Do you think, just a blanket statement, running backs that go in the top 100, do you think they'll be priced up again? Because like you said, it's been 3 straight years where in general, the running back price tags have decreased. And that was coming off that crazy 0 RB or no discounting. Like that 0 RB, I think it was 2022, whatever it was, where all of the late round guys hit and there's a bunch of injuries up top. And it was no matter what, you needed the 0 RB teams to do it. And since then, we haven't really seen that year. I do wonder if the bottoming was in for the kind of 0 RB movement, and not saying that you can't do it. You can definitely mix it in. But I do wonder if the price tags are going to go up.
I think so. It's just been 2 years in a row where the running backs were just such smash picks. I do think the first round, there's still going to be a lot of wide receivers in there, but I think it's kind of the running backs, the tier of running backs that we're in kind of rounds 3 or 4, like Amari and Hampton, James Cook, Chase Brown. Those guys I think are going to go up maybe a full round. And then I also think it's probably just the end of the Travis Etienne, Javonte Williams, guys who at one point in their careers were considered talented. Their former first or second round picks are listed by their teams as the starting running backs, are in above average offenses, and we just galaxy brain our ways all the way down to pick 120 with those guys. I just don't think we're going to get that type of free starting running back value anymore. At least I'd be surprised if we do.
Yeah, I think kind of what happened there, and running back dead zone was definitely a thing, but that was when the price tags were a lot different than they have been recently. And I think people are very fearful of being the idiot that took the running back that completely bust. But you should be okay being the idiot on the 1 out of 5 running backs that bust if the 4 other ones happen to be really good picks. So I just think that it's okay if you were drafting Alvin Kamara, and that also meant that in that similar-ish type of range, you were drafting other guys that popped off at the running back position over the wide receivers. So I think it was kind of interesting. Ramondre Stevenson, Tyler Algier, Blake Corum, Tony Pollard, those guys, I won't say anyone say they absolutely smashed like crazy this entire season, but if you look at your team, those guys were contributing very, very reasonable fantasy points throughout the entire season. And I wanted to spin this back to the fantasy points over replacement. When I looked at it for this year, it was at 7.8 fantasy points was the bar you needed to clear to be a reasonable flex play. So 7.8, that was true at running back, wide receiver, and tight end. And I think what's happened there is we draft a whole lot more of the wide receivers trying to fill that flex spot. Where Ramondre Stevenson, or even when you said Derrick Henry, you got me that 7.5 points and stuff, that's still hitting your lineup. So I think the floor of these Ramondre Stevenson types, when they score 7 touchdowns across the year, that's 7 usable weeks. It doesn't seem like the sexiest outcome, but I do think that we're even underselling some of those running backs. And I think that's how your team was able to stay alive all the way throughout. Is obviously you got the Ramondre Stevenson week when you needed one. I'm sure Blake Corum had some big weeks mixed in there, and Algier started off kind of hot. But I just found that tier of running back, I think, is also underrated when you're looking at the data.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's even maybe like kind of an archetype of running back, even more specifically, that is a little bit undervalued in best ball. It's like the backup running back that has a standalone role, like isn't just a pure handcuff, but
Charbonnet
has
is a perfect example.
Yeah, exactly. But has like no story you can tell where they like overtake the starter to be the starter by the end of the year. Like I think Algier is a really good example of that. Like you can't tell a story, oh, Algier's better than Bijan, he's going to be the starter. No, but he has plenty of games where he gets 10 to 15 carries. He mixes in at the goal line. That's pretty useless in redraft fantasy unless, Bijan gets hurt and then he's an awesome asset, obviously. But in best ball, where you don't have to predict when he's going to score, that's actually quite useful. So I'd say that applied to both him, Ramondre, Blake Corum. I don't think you really could have predicted that at the beginning of the year, but it ended up working out that way, where he was kind of in that solid 1B role throughout the season. So yeah, that's something I like to think about a little bit. And then I think we'll maybe get to this later in terms of like predicting, when the spike weeks are going to happen. But with a guy like Ramondre, he's not the archetype of a week 17 smash player, but if you just get a guy that gets touches, it can happen. So I try not to think too much about over predicting that type of thing.
Yeah, I think all those guys are also, the goal line kind of backs where if the other guy needs a breather, their touch that they're getting, let's say they only get 8 touches per game, sometimes those are the valuable touches that we're looking for. And I think that the days of the Justice Hills and full PPR, all the New England running backs, it's really hard to pull that off in half PPR. And I think some of these kind of hammer types are interesting. The week 17 stuff, this is obviously just kind of interesting that Ramondre Stevenson got better as the season progressed. And obviously that runs anti to my theory, the post by rookie bump where Travion's supposed to go crazy out there. How much are we supposed to be looking at week 17 projections? And I think maybe more important than that is, how do you build a team that has, enough juice with the olds to get you there? And then a Luther Burden comes through for you in week 17 here. Pete said it's a yin and yang. I think that's a good way to put it here. Do you believe in the yin yang theory, and how are we supposed to play for week 17 when we're drafting in your case in June?
I heard Pete's yin yang thing. I think that was a really good way of putting it. I totally believe in that. And I'll almost frame it a little bit differently. In terms of specifically the rookie question, I think some people have the misunderstanding that in best ball, because this is a massive tournament, there's 670,000 people. Your logic might be, okay, I got to be first out of 670,000. I got to take the highest upside player with every single pick because I need to beat fucking 600,000 people, right? It seems crazy, but it's not really how the tournament works, right? It's really 3 kind of small field tournaments. Just finishing 2 out of 12 is not that crazy of an outcome. That's coming in first and second in your home league, right? And then even in weeks 15 and 16, you only need to finish first out of 15 or 16 people in those pods, something like that. That's only a top 5 percentile outcome. So, just to get to week 17, you don't need the absolute nuts roster to get there. So I kind of think of in the same way that people talk about kind of positional buckets when they're drafting, if you kind of assigned auction dollar values to all the players or sort of all your picks in a draft, your first and second round picks are really valuable. Once you get to round 18 or 17, those are $1 auction values, right? And they say, okay, you don't want to put too many dollars in the quarterback bucket. You don't want to put too many dollars in the running back bucket. You kind of want to balance it out. I kind of think of it the same way with the rookies or upside picks. I think there's kind of a sweet spot of draft capital you want to allocate to the rookies. I'm not saying I've solved this or have a model that proves this out, but I bet if someone did research on it, this would be true. If you exit a draft with 10 rookies, even if like individually they were exciting upside picks, like I think you're making a pretty big mistake because you're going to end up with so many like zeros and busts. If you also exit a draft with like only the Darnell Mooney, Adam Thielen types, like that's probably a mistake as well. So I really think there is a balance there of, you know, getting enough upside picks so that you have that upside in week 17, but don't do too many that you just end up with tons of busts and you're never going to get to the finals anyways.
I think that was all really good stuff. I've never really thought about it that way, but really the other teams that you meet in the finals have already eliminated everybody else. Like they did the work for you. So I think, like you said, the goal is to come in first out of 672,000 people, which let's not, like, the odds of that are very low. Let's make sure everyone knows that. Odds of this happening to you, extremely low. But you don't have to eliminate those teams for you, which also does not mean you have to aim for the 0.999999 percentile outcome there. So I think that's just a good way to kind of do it. I think that your team was a good example of that, where I believe you finished second in your regular season, so against the drafters you were going against, and then you kind of had your best seasons in the playoffs. So like I think that you didn't have the best team I've ever seen through the weeks 1 through 14. It was a fine enough team to get there.
We can admit it. It was a pretty mid team for weeks 1
Your
through 14.
team was pretty shitty.
Yeah, it was a pretty bad team. We can admit it.
Let's be honest. It's 35 minutes of the show. The team was pretty bad. No, it was a very good, well-constructed team. No, I'm just joking there. The whole team made sense. I think the roster construction, the diminishing returns, the teammate correlation, you had a little bit of week 17 bring back in there. I think that you balanced the team pretty properly. I think that's why I wanted to start with the balance. I just think that in general, this team did check a lot of the boxes that we're kind of talking about. I think that it did project well in terms of just like preseason projected points, because I think you added the third quarterback, the diminishing returns were on your favor. And then you also gave yourself some week 17 upside, I think, just in the projection with, you know, Derrick Henry and Luther Burden and stacking, you know, like Brock Purdy and George Kittle. If he was healthy, he was probably going to help your team out too. So was there anything like else about your team that you found interesting, or the landscapes or pods or anything else that you've heard people complain to you about for winning this whole thing?
Yeah, I think like one other point, I guess, while we're on the week 17 topic is the rookie wide. So I think like a very common thing that people say that I think has some truth to it is, you know, rookie wide receivers, or rookies in general, spike in week 17. And you look at my roster and I think, you know, Luther Burden put up a massive score in week 17. And I think there's a bit of a lesson there, but like, I think people always love to like take aggregated data and then apply it to every single player. And I think like we should be a little bit more selective in who we're applying that sort of rookie, you know, playoff upside bump to, because I do think a lot of that data is like guys like Luther Burden, who they start the season, they're like 4th on the depth chart. It takes them a while to earn the coach's trust. And then by the playoffs, they're just running way more routes than they were at the start of the season. Like, I think it's mostly not like, oh, rookies magically get more efficient in the playoffs. I think there's some of that. I think it's mostly like a routes thing. You think of other guys that this has happened with, Amon-Ra St. Brown, you know, 4th round wide receiver, didn't really start until late in his rookie season and then have that massive spike. I think when we're talking about wide receivers like Marvin Harrison Jr., his rookie year, where he's just like a clear-cut starter from week 1 on, like I don't see really a reason that you would expect him to perform better in week 17 than he would in weeks 1, 2, or 3. So I do think sometimes like we just have to be careful about how we kind of apply those narratives to the aggregate. But again, like think through when you're making that bet of like which players will have sort of higher projections or higher upside down the stretch. Like think about where are they starting on the depth chart today and what that might evolve to over the course of the season. Don't just apply it to like every single player.
Yeah, I'm looking at the rookie wide receivers. You drafted Luther Burden in round 10. There was a couple other rookies drafted in rounds 9 and 10. Trey Harris and his huge season. Jaden Higgins, his huge season. Kyle Williams, big season. Jack Besh right there as
Massive
well.
season for Jack Besh.
Huge seasons for these guys around them. So they're definitely the key unlock there. Yeah, I think there's a playing time based part of the post by rookie bump that we're talking about, not necessarily all of a sudden their efficiency is going to go crazy. So I think that's a really good point there. Well, I'm glad that you are going to get back into space, doing a couple more podcast appearances out there. I'm glad you're going to pay for some new Wi-Fi with this $2 million before you get back in the industry here. And that was a really cool, not just to win it, but to live sweat it with everybody out there. So congratulations to you. We look forward to you doing more shows around the industry. And with that, why don't you tell everybody where we can make sure we're following you?
Yeah. So you can follow me on Twitter at Sherman_FFB. Maybe I can buy like a better X handle with some of my winnings too.
I know you can.
Yeah.
I know you can.
Yeah. So that could be in the works. But yeah, thanks for having me on, Hayden. And yeah, really appreciate the ability to talk through this team and think that we got through some good lessons in it without just over fixating on, individual players and sort of the luck that can happen with any roster.
Hell yeah. Yep. We're going to get back here for a bunch more NFL playoff stuff. And then speaking of rookies, it's NFL draft stuff. I haven't gone in and clicked the first rookie to watch their tape yet for the incoming class, but that is coming very, very soon. So lots of these rookies we're going to be overdrafting. We will have videos for on this channel. Just stay tuned. With that promo code, the show, NFL Playoff Best Ball Pick'em. And then we're on to bigger and better things in other sports, NBA if you like it. But with that, let's get out of here. Peace.